In 2008's The Incredible Hulk, we're introduced to Bruce Banner, a man who is haunted by his past. A single mistake cost him everything as a failed experiment with gamma radiation turned him into a monster. In the first scenes, we see his current living state, living in the favelas of Brazil to hide from the US government hunting him down. If you've ever been to a favela, you know how chaotic and noisy it is, but Bruce has taken countermeasures by implementing Brazilian jiu-jitsu and the meditation and discipline that goes into it into his daily life. It also helps that the military knows he'd try and minimize places where the stress would cause him to transform, which makes his location risky but clever. He trains with Rickson Gracie, a real-life Hall of Famer in the martial art, who teaches him how to control his breathing under intense stress. The life he's built for himself is designed to cause as little stimuli as possible, taking all the necessary precautions to minimize stress and, by extension, a high BPM. His watch serves as a sort of Geiger counter for himself, in which if the BPM reaches 200, he hulks out. Fitting comparison too given his origins. In an accident at a bottle factory, the US manages to find him and hunt him down, and this is exacerbated by some thugs he defended a woman from, now looking to settle the score with him. As you would imagine, no amount of breathing control could help prevent a rising heart rate after a kick to the stomach, and so he hulks out. But for Bruce, this is normal. Start a new life, establish connections, live as low stress and low profile as possible, hulk out, and repeat. It's an endless cycle, like Sisyphus pushing a boulder for all eternity.
This is what you're greeted to when you open up Blackarooni's Cate Randa video. You come in there expecting Monarch Legacy of Monsters or Godzilla or even the titular character herself, but instead you are introduced to the Incredible Hulk 2008. You are going to be sitting there thinking that this is going to be interesting because he opened up with a non-linear comparison, where the comparisons come first and the thoughts come after, and he'll tie it back in together. And you're waiting and waiting and waiting. There's no crucial moment that he uses to define the character, or he doesn't talk about the themes or the cinematography or the editing or anything. For approximately 3 minutes, you watch him recite the plot, and then he does it again immediately after with Daredevil. Both of these serve as like this nullifier to each other, where all he does is recite the plot for both, and implicitly he is like, these are genius because I like these things, and that's how you're supposed to pull from this. The only problem with all of this is that because he just recites the plot, there's nothing interesting being said, nothing substantiative. You aren't going to learn anything. It's a very onanistic moment in this video where Blackarooni chooses to talk about things he likes instead of something that, you know, can be on topic. He doesn't choose a comparison from outside the box whatsoever because he should know at this point that he might be getting a little predictable. So he should try something different. Instead, Blackarooni chooses to just do that. And that's the big problem here, right? He's very much inspired by other YouTubers to do this, but he hasn't mastered this at all. This is not his format. So instead, you're kind of just sitting there waiting for him to, move on, and then he gets into it. And it's like the previous two things were a bunch of non sequiturs. But also, the other thought comes up into at least my head that I feel like he just edited this, scripted this, recorded, and probably even rewatched these works for nothing because these don't add a new insight to anything. These don't change your mind. These don't add anything to the film or enhance your experience. You're kind of just sitting there and yeah, that's pretty much how it goes. You're just sitting there. And so that's basically the key issue so far. He's doesn't have a thesis statement, so he's kind of just saying stuff. And then when he gets into the actual topic, which seems to be disconnected from this, he has to eventually haphazardly, you know, bring this all in together.
At the time of writing, Monarch has been airing on Apple TV, and I have been taking note of the main character, Cate Randa, and her reception in the fanbase. Many side with her as a well-written character. Many champion her for her triumph and honest representation. Some don't mind her, and some hate her. Of course, I'm mainly focused on what the show tells me about her and the type of person she is. So, who is Cate Randa? According to Gojipedia, who translates character bios from the movies and shows into the forum, Cate Randa is a quick-witted young woman whose life is changed forever when she witnesses Godzilla attacking San Francisco in 2014. This event traumatizes her and she suffers from PTSD. That's all well and good. I would imagine a lot of people would be traumatized and suffer from PTSD in such a catastrophic event. However, the thing is that what Gojipedia is saying isn't exactly true. Of course, this isn't the editor's fault. Whoever they are merely transcribing the events of the show onto the forum, which means that the events of the show are false.
So earlier, Blackarooni says this.
Of course, I'm mainly focused on what the show tells me about her, and
immediately afterwards, Blackarooni goes straight to Gojipedia and reads off of Cate Randa's personality. So no, this is not from the show. This is from the wiki page. He says, oh yeah, well, they're transcribing it, so it's okay. But the problem is that he immediately before this said that he was getting all this from the show. He didn't get any of this from the show. He got all this from wiki page, and now we'll proceed to spin it in the manner of the wiki page to say the show is bad.
See, Godzilla didn't exactly attack San Francisco in 2014. It was the Mutos. Godzilla only arrived there with the goal of stopping them. It was the military that attacked Godzilla with the goal of preventing him from crashing through the still not evacuated bridge. In fact, that is Admiral Stenz's immediate concern. But it's the military that caused it anyway. Godzilla in this specific scenario is as much a victim of the military as they are to him, and Godzilla is as much of an aggressor as they are. However, in this show, we see him purposefully grab the bridge and collapse it slowly and methodically as opposed to erratically, like the film shows us. This fundamental retcon in this universe is what kickstarts Cate's character arc in the show, because if it weren't for Godzilla breaking through the bridge this way, and thus leading him to have the wire stuck on his shoulder that he ends up pulling, which happened to have that piece of debris stuck to it that happened to fall into the bus, therefore losing her kids, none of the emotional aspects of the show regarding her guilt and her kids would have happened. And as if this scene wasn't broken enough, that wire Godzilla yanked wasn't even on the first shot when he crashed through, almost as if it would have snapped from the other side after pushing through it, causing it to fling away from Godzilla erratically. But it appears in his hand in the next shot of him, and at this point he can just wiggle his wrist and it just falls off, but then he lets it wrap around his shoulder so he has to yank it off. And again, this only happens so that the kids could die. You really want those kids to die, don't you, Ryder? Also, notice how when Godzilla crashes through, the bus driver gets knocked out, but Cate doesn't get flinked forward. Was the bus driver drunk? Was he loosely grabbing the steering wheel? In this situation, when he'd be holding it as firmly as Cate was holding onto the bus seats, the bus driver, who is in a more stable position, gets knocked out, while Cate, who is in a more unstable position, is perfectly fine.
Right.
Also, notice how she just stands around looking at Godzilla instead of tending to her kids, all of which are not trying to leave the bus and are just waiting for her to pull them out. I guess they don't have the same survival instinct an adult would. She does the bare minimum though, and she pulls 3 kids out, but then she just stops, and so do the kids, and they hide the fact that she stops by including a shot of the people in the background running and screaming. And notice how she's just grabbing their hands and not actually carrying them, meaning that they are more than capable of jumping out on their own if they really wanted to. I guess they didn't want to live. By comparison, let's look at the original scene from 2014. Godzilla is approaching the bridge, and there are ships there waiting for him. Godzilla decides to rise from the ocean to see if he can walk past them, but is greeted by the bridge. In the meantime, the military wastes no time in attacking him, and each attack forces him through the bridge even more until he stumbles through it violently. The bus driver harboring Sam Brody doesn't even see Godzilla underneath the bridge, but he sees the missiles being fired and immediately decides to get the bus out of harm's way, and it's then when Godzilla rises. A cable from the bridge is blocking the way, but when a tank backs up and drags it out of the way whilst trying to aim at Godzilla better, he immediately steps on the gas and drives away. And the driver was arguably closer to the danger than Cate was, but thanks to his survival instincts, he was able to get the jump on Godzilla and escape with the kids alive. Someone get this man a raise, he deserves it. And before we get too far off, one might make the case that she's frozen in fear. In situations like that, people experience fight, flight, or freeze. In this case, she chose freeze. But isn't it strange that she's the only one? Because if we got a quick 2-second scene of a select number of people just standing there and staring, say about 2 or 3 more, then fine. But none are present. And no, these kids behind her aren't freezing. They're looking at the bus they were just in, full of their friends, falling. We can even see one of the kids screaming just like Cate is. but they're immediately escorted by the military personnel. I was gonna try and be charitable, but building your character out of a major retcon chock full of contrivances is nothing to play devil's advocate for. It's inexcusable. It doesn't necessarily damage the entire show, but it does damage Cate because they are fabricating a scene that didn't happen just to create a character and have that event drive her decisions. But
I let this scene play out for a while because I wanted to show you something interesting. Blackarooni is criticizing a dream sequence. Yeah, you heard it right. A dream sequence. You're probably asking me, how could it be a dream sequence? Well, let's go backwards to previous scenes in that same episode to show you how this is a dream sequence, or at least a fabricated structure of events where Godzilla is quote unquote more malicious than what you see in Godzilla 2014.
We have to wait.
東京へようこそ。路線のため座ったままお待ちください。Welcome to Tokyo. Please be seated for decontamination. Thank you.
It's all about giving us the illusion of safety. Like spraying us for parasites would help prevent another monster attack.
Now that we have context behind the bridge scene, specifically of Cate Randa's memories, we could talk about why Blackarooni criticizing an in-person, in-character perspective from her perspective on the bridge scene is actually really bad. So, in narrative modes in Sazek literature by Lubomir Dozol, there is a thing that he uses where in narrative modes called the form and the form. We are following the form, which is the third person. The form is the first person. The form has three different types, just like the form: the objective, rhetorical, and personal or subjective. But the subjective third person narrator is when, the narrator confines their interpretation of these events to the point of view of a specific character within the story. While in Godzilla 2014, it is the objective events happening with flashes towards some of the characters. We have Cate Randa's perspective. An example that we could use for this is literally in this show where Cate Randa sees Godzilla as a malicious threat. You can see Godzilla's roar or like pierce, your sounds or whatever in your house or whatever as the bridge falls down in front of them, in front of the bus and such. That's an example. That's her perspective. But we know that Godzilla didn't maliciously do this in any manner. There's a reason why Godzilla directly roars at Cate, it seems like, because that's how Cate sees it. Godzilla is directly interacting with her. The bridge is just a space for Godzilla to destroy the family. That's why when the kids leap out of the bus, those are mostly more representative of Cate's family that gets shattered by Godzilla. Only a few made it out, while the rest couldn't make it out. That's why Cate is estranged and such, because, she lost a lot of people, including those kids that she was assigned to protect and such. But it wasn't exaggerated to this degree. So, with this in mind, we literally just watched Blackarooni complain about a symbolic scene, both about Cate Randa's recanting of events of the bridge scene in a distorted manner, and a symbolic scene for her family trauma, with Godzilla at the center of it. So, with this understood, we can actually move on to bigger and better things in the video.
the Gojipedia description also mentioned that she was quick-witted, and forgive me for being crass, but this is just a polite way of saying she's a grade A asshole to everyone around her for absolutely no reason. Let's start with when she first met Kentaro and Emiko Randa. Of course, the assholery doesn't even begin there. It begins a few minutes earlier when she outright dismisses her mother Caroline. She is desperate to know what it is she finds, and whatever it is, it sounds important. But Cate treats it as her mother is just nagging her for no reason.
You said you'd call when you landed.
Yeah, and I just landed.
Yeah, 2 hours ago. I've been
Well,
waiting.
I had to get through immigrations and customs, get a cab.
Oh, God. So what, you're there now?
I'm here.
And?
And what, Mom? You think he'll just be sitting here waiting for someone to bring him home?
In this universe, radioactive monsters exist, and your mother is calling you desperately. It's times like this in which you'd want to be as close to your family as possible, which, no matter how you may feel towards them, you necessarily have to maintain communication. It is imperative that you do so. But we just met her in this scene. Maybe she and her mother have bad blood. Maybe they don't get along. Maybe she hates her mother. Who knows?
I can't particularly determine Blackarooni's intent with this part here. He has some addendums there in the video talking about, oh yeah, Cate's being a jerk to her mom is intentionally written that way, but also at the same time, he frames this as like a bad thing for the writers to do with the whole people should be in contact 24/7 with their parents, and it's imperative that communication is key in this world. The reality is that, well, Cate Randa doesn't care. So is it really imperative? Not really, because evidently, as you see, it's structured like still a concerned parent. She's not concerned about the giant monsters attacking. She is concerned about her touching down and then not responding. This is the equivalent of like you not calling your parents or telling your parents or anybody or a guardian that you just landed. They probably think you're, a goner out there. So I don't know what the whole giant monsters part has to do with this, but it doesn't add anything beyond this idea that, oh, yeah, well, because there's giant monsters there, we should be caring more about contacting each other. It's the same society, but with giant monsters. The economy might be different, but it's still the same place as it always has been, evidently in this world.
She enters a home that is supposed to be her father's, but she doesn't count on the fact that there are people living there. Understandable. She sees pictures of her father and the secondary family and is shocked. Understandable. She sees a woman and, while scared that a random woman just entered her flat, she asks who she is in Japanese, and Cate asks her the same thing in English. Oh, okay, stop. Forgive me if I get ahead of myself, but it is later established that Cate no longer speaks Japanese because it's what she spoke with her father, and she hates her father, so she refuses to speak it. That is an incredibly stupid reason for someone to stop using a skill to enhance communication. Intentional or not, it is selfish to withhold that information and impede communication like this, especially if it can prevent a tense situation from escalating. But she doesn't, and the situation begins to escalate. It's only after Kentaro starts speaking English that the situation is somewhat ameliorated. A simple solution would be for her to just say, in Japanese,
侵入して申し訳ありませんが、このアパートの鍵は私の父ランデンコウが持っていました。皆さんは彼を知っていますか?
To which Kentaro can respond,
どうやって彼の名前を知っていますか? あの人は私の父です。あなたは誰ですか? 何でしょう?
To which Cate can respond,
申し訳ありませんが、私の名前はケイト・ランダ彼の娘です。彼は前に私のことについて言及しませんでしたか? 彼はこれまであなたのことについて一度も言及したことがありません。それでよろしければ私は彼を探しています。彼がどこにいるか知っていますか? 彼はどこへ行ったのでしょうか? 彼はどこにいるのでしょう?
This fix is terrible. I'm sorry, but it's really bad. It has absolutely nothing to do with characterization, but in fact, it does this so Blackarooni could warp these characters into his own perceived ideas. These characters are not communicating with each other perfectly, so they're bad characters or something along those lines. He's appalled that Cate Randa would abandon Japanese for personal reasons, and so what he does is that he gives Cate Randa Japanese and makes her act like a robot and act calm and all that stuff. It's really bad because it just goes against her very abrasive personality that you see at the beginning that he deliberately emphasizes repeatedly over and over again. So this is a discordant fix compared to what he was talking about. But the other problem with this fix is that, like, this wouldn't happen. This is just dumb. It wouldn't happen. So what is the point of this fix? It doesn't fix anything because the scene is already fine, and also the scene is redundant redundant. Specifically, his fix scene is redundant because right after they convey information to each other on who her father is, and so to both of these people, not to can you tell me where my father is in Japanese? So this is an awful fix.
And they probably wouldn't believe her immediately, which is pretty rational, but she could provide documents like her passport, her ID, things of the sort. She'd be purposely putting herself in a vulnerable position to prove that she's telling the truth and ease down the tension.
This is the dumbest thing I have heard in a hot minute. I'm not even going to argue against it. That was just stupid. We're moving on.
Moving on, they both decide to interrogate her and ask for proof that she is really Hiroshi's daughter. Emiko, being the intuitive mother that she is, notices that she has his eyes, but Kentaro is justifiably defensive, so he asks for proof. And Cate, a stranger to these people, who have no idea of who she is, where she comes from, what her motivations are, her moral alignments, has made claims nobody in their right mind would believe at face value and, in their eyes, has intruded in an innocent family's home, begins antagonizing Kentaro. Why would you do this? Especially if you want answers. Why risk them getting more defensive and refusing to give you any potential knowledge they might have that you might want to know?
Blackarooni here doesn't seem to understand characterization. Luckily, I do, so I could talk about this. Cate Randa is a jerk. That's obvious. Blackarooni genuinely is using her characterization as a way to criticize the character. Like she's a real living being. So this stops being less of an analysis and more like him complaining that Cate Rand is doing all the wrong things and a skill check or whatever. He doesn't really see her as a character, but he sees her as like a living person. So that's like the issue we got going on here. So he's intentionally, not really intentionally, I wouldn't say, but his way of thinking allows him to ignore the abstractions taking place for the character to act this way or the character to do this or, communicate this way.
Prove it.
Where's your proof? A bunch of pictures?
Yes. That's more proof than you've provided thus far, and Kentaro and Emiko have the high ground here because not only are they in a position to demand answers given all the proof that is displayed in their walls, if they decide to call the police, they will find more evidence of what they say than what she says. So she is in a rather vulnerable position, and she still decides to spill this noxious venom out of her serpentine maw.
I've got pictures. This is us camping at the Redwoods. He got poison oak and had these horrible red blotches all over his arms.
Well, if you had the pictures all this time, then why didn't you show them to begin with and save yourself the time? Useful time best invested in finding your father, since that's your goal, right? And even then, for all we know, those pictures could be fake. At least that would be the normal reaction for them to have. Many people have been scammed by pretending to be a long-lost family member. Ever heard of the Nigerian uncle scam? They could ask for her legal documents like her passport, birth certificate, ID, and the name of her mother to try and verify this.
Blackarooni is throwing several contradictory arguments that invalidate his previous arguments. To start off, he says this.
Well, if you had the pictures all this time, then why didn't you show them to begin with and save yourself?
Moments after, Blackarooni says this.
Even then, for all we know, those pictures could be fake. At least that would be the normal reaction for them to have. Many people have been scammed by pretending to be a long-lost family member. Ever heard of the Nigerian uncle scam? They could ask for her legal documents like her passport, birth certificate, ID, and the name of her mother to try and verify this.
Hey, so remember Blackarooni's fix that he created earlier? Well, the problem with the fix, besides the obvious characterization breaking stuff that he tries to do, is that Blackarooni goes, okay, so if they call the police on her, then, she's going to go to jail because they have more evidence than her. However, the only issue with this argument is that, they're not going to call the police on her. So this whole argument kind of gets thrown out the window because this didn't happen in the show. He's creating a hypothetical scenario within the show, within what he considers to be logical, but that's not going to happen. So, what is the point of this? The other issue that Blackarooni uses to do this is that he makes this police argument, but then veers off track. He starts talking about how Cate Randa should show the pictures earlier for maximum communication, like in the scene where he does the fixes. However, the only problem with this is that that means the fix becomes invalidated because the fix literally says the same information that this picture scene has. So Blackarooni himself genuinely could not interpret or watch a scene that didn't outright spell it in your face. So he wrote an entire scene where the characters had to act like robots, ignore characterization and all other things to make this scene work in his head. So then when we go to the picture scene, ultimately that means it's redundant. So this rapid fire set of criticisms that Blackarooni is doing so far hasn't worked out for him at all. It just makes like his version of Legacy of Monsters awful. But finally, the one thing that Blackarooni also has to do is inevitably, because he's arguing about the police in his hypothetical scenario, he has to tie this back into the police or legal documents. Blackarooni has mentioned earlier that he wanted this scene to go on faster than it should. Essentially, no party should be confused. They should have much more clearing understanding of each other. The only problem is that when Blackarooni does this, Blackarooni wants them, the main characters, Kitaro and Kitaro's mom, to go and ask Cate Randa for legal documents. He believes that's more certain authentication than pictures that he immediately says, oh well, they could be photoshopped. And he wants Cate Randa to go out, go get legal documents and all that stuff and come back with warrants and whatever it is to prove that she is the daughter of Hiroshi Randa. The only issue is that it's based on pictures. The whole point of the scene is that when Cate Randa enters the room and sees pictures, they don't have authentication that they're, you know, Hiroshi Randa's wife and son and such. They just have pictures. So Cate Randa uses pictures. There's no need for her to pull out a passport, legal documents, or do all that willy-nilly stuff. So what Blackarooni is doing here is that he is throwing these rapid fire criticisms, as I said before, and they're not working because every time he does these, now he has to answer all these questions inevitably. These are all rhetorical questions in actuality, however. They're all rhetorical questions to go, this show is actually poorly written and they should have thought about this.
How long were you married to him?
Don't talk to her like that.
Nani? I'm not judging her.
That doesn't matter. These people don't know you, and you don't know them, and she, so far, has been the good cop in this dynamic, so maybe try and be a little less rude, why don't ya?
But aren't you even curious who he was cheating on first? Your mother or mine?
Okay, I see what's going on. She's bitter about what her father did, which, fair enough. But why is she dumping this world-shattering news to both Emiko and Kentaro with all the delicacy and care of a quad-mount minigun? Why not ease them in? You don't know how much they can take, what they've been through, how they'll handle such information.
I'm sorry I barged in here.
Hey, at least she apologized. Better late than never, I suppose.
Let's just forget this happened.
Hey, hold on now. You don't get to decide that, love. You barge into their home, create chaos, insult them after they start asking questions, and as soon as they ask a good question, you freeze up and decide to leave? That's not how this works. You can't just do that.
What do you want?
Can you tell us anything? We have been waiting, looking. Hiroshi's gone.
Let's just forget this happened.
Are you kidding me?
Please help me understand.
I'm with you, pal.
Blackarooni functions as a background laugh track for the show or whatever. This is not a sitcom, but in fact a character analysis or whatever. But the only issue is that Blackarooni isn't analyzing anything. He isn't looking at any single shot from here and approaching it from that angle or anything to analyze Cate's character. Instead, he's just saying snarky little quips. Now, there's another YouTuber who does this, much bigger than him, and one he looks up towards.
And from getting smashed into the ground and begins fighting alongside him. As a form of update on what's happening, Iron Man sums up the situation for Peter as this.
He's from space. He came here to steal a necklace from a wizard.
Brilliant.
Approach these two comparisons like this. When you are watching a comedy show or a sitcom or whatever, the laugh track goes off, and that's when you're required to laugh. The exact same thing is happening here, but in a different manner. The movie that they're reviewing functions as the sitcom. The commentary over here functions as the laugh track. However, the thing is that a laugh track and a review are fundamentally different. So, how could you combine these two? Well, the reality is that Mahler isn't doing reviews. Blackarooni isn't analyzing Kate Randa's character. Instead, what they're doing is that they're deliberately explaining the plot and talking about the plot so they can just say, oh, I didn't like this or I like this. It functions as a game review. That's pretty much it. And because Blackarooni and Mahler are doing the exact same thing, we could do the inverse for the praises and the criticisms, where Mahler does the exact same thing on his criticisms, and Blackarooni does the exact same thing on his praises. I hope that makes sense, but if you need any more examples, I'm going to give you two more examples from his Unbridled Praise video so you get the point.
And we get two fantastic lines. One where Peter asks Ned to cause a distraction so he can get into the fight, and immediately Ned simply does this.
We're all gonna die!
That's just fantastic.
You're trespassing in this city and on this planet. It means get lost, Squidward.
That's just fantastic.
I wish I could.
You could if you just use your words, your brain. They are basic things that you have to do. These are the bare minimum. Why should I have to think of such obvious things? So she leaves the keys behind and fritz off because the scene is over. Nothing was learned save for the fact that Cate has met the family her father had behind her back. She doesn't try to delicately tell Emiko what happened, despite the fact that this would help her find any information about her father a lot quicker. We cut to Cate walking off, and apparently she's been ignoring her mother's calls because reasons.
Blackarooni here deliberately omits plot details again so he can make his argument work. This argument here is silly that he implies that this is a dumb reason for her to be mad at her mom or dumb reason for her not to answer her mom's calls or take them. The reality is that she hates her mom. Blackarooni himself admits this in the subtitles where he goes, Cate is deliberately being an ass to her mom. So, what is he arguing for? Why is he putting this as a mark against the show? Why is he putting this as a mark against anything? This is just basic characterization. What is the point of saying this at all?
When she decides to answer back, she tells her mother that there's nothing in Japan for them despite walking away from the only people she knows right now that could possibly help them both figure things out, accuses her mother of knowing something that she couldn't have any idea of knowing, and just hangs up. Okay, so far this first impression of our protagonist has been less than stellar. Of course there is a case to be made about her character progression, but in this particular case it's character retrogression, because as the show continues her actions get progressively more deplorable, and not once is she held accountable for them. It's only near the last 2 or 3 episodes of the season where she stops because, well, the plot doesn't really have room for her to be a jerk to anyone. But what about her PTSD? Well, there have been only 2 instances of this in the show. The first time was in the very first episode when the lockdown reminded her of the events of 2014, which is a bit strange that she's the only one that panics, and a bit of a coincidence that she happens to run into Kentaro and Emiko on their way to the bunker. But
Blackarooni has never encountered character progression, at least in an actual show or anything, so he's kind of just basing this off of whatever he's talking about, where characters get held accountable inevitably and they have to grow. The reality is that not every single form of character progression is like this. There are good characters who aren't being held accountable for their actions, and there are villain characters who aren't held accountable for their actions. The reality is that accountability doesn't particularly matter here. The point is to see how these characters grow and such. So, accountability can be one of these, but there are other ways for these characters to progress. Blackarooni is insistent on this idea that accountability is a step to character progression. With that out of the way, because he doesn't understand that, we can move on to bigger and better things, like this weird part where he like tries to sow some doubt, like, oh well, it's a coincidence that Kentaro and Kentaro's mom were at the same shelter with her, and it's weird that Kate Randa wasn't was the only person scared and having PTSD attacks. And it's like, what am I supposed to tell you? There are literally crowds of people running, scores of people running, and you're telling me that nobody else is scared?
That aside, May is also characterized as growing increasingly close to Cate and vice versa. One of the main catalysts for this development is Cate saving and taking care of her when she almost dies of hypothermia. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with saving a life. The problem is, once again, what it ends up leading to. There is a way to have Cate and May still be besties, but the way they do it in the show comes across as mean-spirited, specifically towards Kentaro. See, Kentaro and May broke up, but it was not exactly under good terms. You still see them acting awkward next to each other, which, yeah, most broken couples act this way. This is in some way realistic. But I find it strange that Kentaro finds out how much of a scumbag May actually is after the breakup, and he reacts almost as if he's expecting it, which makes you wonder why they broke up in the first place.
Blackarooni has taken a detour from talking about Cate so he could complain about how they shafted Kentaro. Mostly, this is mostly just a vehicle for him to complain that they were mean to Kentaro in the story and that May's a jerk and that the show endorses this or whatever because they don't like Kentaro or something. So, pretty pointless section, so we're just going to move on.
Cate, instead of helping Kentaro pick up his relationship with May, decides to steal his girl, instead of doing anything to mend the relationship, because, you know, as a sister you would think that she would be inclined to help her brother, but no.
This is insanely childish. This is basically a grown man straight up telling you in your face that he's mad that a woman, basically Cate, took away Kentaro's girl, despite the fact the relationship was impossible to be mended back. The story made it very clear. The characters make it very clear. Every single bit and detail of this makes it very clear. They're awkward with each other. They don't really want to be near each other. They have no way of getting back together. And Cate and May get closer. So no, it's not Cate Randa stealing somebody's girl. Cate Randa is, yes, a serial cheater, and then both of her girlfriends get smushed by Godzilla. But, you know, what is any of this? I listed all that, but like, what are these criticisms here? What is this? This is not even a criticism.
Another thing that she does is influence Kentaro's worldview, specifically around his father. At the very beginning of the show, Kentaro was very defensive of his father, but over time he starts hating his father because of what Cate keeps telling him. And this isn't to say that the information that Cate provided isn't correct. However, it speaks to Cate's fundamental nature regarding her view of her father, which is a very negative one, and she also wants to see other people hate him as much as she does. But the thing is that she doesn't know why it is that Hiroshi did what he did, and neither does Kentaro, so antagonizing him is not going to help anybody. Now, this isn't necessarily character assassination on Kentaro's part, however, it does say quite a lot when you are the result for the breaking of a relationship, even if the person in said relationship is a bad person.
So, Blackarooni is weirdly peddling this narrative that Cate Randa manipulated Kentaro into hating his dad. The thing is that you would hate your dad too if he went off and cheated on a bunch of women, and then some one of those, children come after this secret and expose it to you. Now, the shared goal initially was to find their dad. However, Cate Randa becomes gradually disinterested in this to go fight Kurt Russell and do all that stuff, right? Meanwhile, Kentaro is still stuck on this. So while May and Cate are doing all that stuff, he's like, sorry. He's like, I hate my dad. I'm going to go find him and give him what for. And so when he finally encounters his dad back at that building, he lets loose because, that's the only thing he can talk about. What else does he have to say to his dad besides
So her mother, Caroline, the only person she's confided in until she met Kentaro and May, is trying to move on from Hiroshi, and she's made progress. But all that progress is undone when she meets Kentaro. Kentaro tries to help Caroline, but immediately she snaps at him. Now, what characters say and do, and what they prioritize or don't, all of it is characterization that happens whenever a character is on screen. It tells you their values, their beliefs, who they are, their morals. So what does Cate decide to do when she sees her brother being treated unfairly? She gets him out of the room and she confronts her mother. Kinda. Sorta.
What the hell is going on?
Quite a lot, actually.
You know what I mean. Inviting him in to get settled like your husband's secret son walks in every day?
What do you expect me to do? Throw him out?
But then...
Have a hysterical breakdown?
Go for it. I wouldn't blame you.
Strange thing to validate throwing him out and having a hysterical breakdown. But in all seriousness, she's telling her mother that it's okay to be upset. Upset about what exactly? She's already upset about the fact that her husband cheated on her and had a whole family, but now her secret half-son arrived and she takes her anger out on him, which, understandable but still wrong, which is what you would consider a character flaw. And in a much better show, this type of character writing would be fine. However, Cate doesn't tell her she's in the wrong for what she's doing, right after opening with,
What the hell is going on? Inviting him in to get settled like your husband's secret son walks in every day?
confrontationally. This implies she was gonna defend Kentaro, but then she validates her rage. That's not a very nice thing to do to your mother or Kentaro. And then she confronts her mother for making Cate go look for Hiroshi in Japan rather than doing it herself.
Let it go.
So you sent me there. You pushed and you pushed because you wanted the truth, but you were too chicken shit to go yourself. That bitch.
Don't talk to me like that. I only wanted what was best for you.
And this was it?
Yes! Yes!
Dude, what am I supposed to do? Die? Like, I don't understand.
I mean, yeah, the methods were wrong, but now you know the truth. The only reason you allow it to torment you is because the series is telling me you love feeling like trash.
This argument is mostly about Cate and Kate's mom, but I do want to bring attention to the terms he calls poorly written. I wouldn't call it terms, but more like words, but you get the point. Blackarooni does not have a metric for what is poorly written and what is well written. You can do that for any media possible. You can go and start talking about how amazing this movie is, or amazing this show is, or amazing something is, and you can talk about it all day long. And you can call it well written, and this is what I hold to the standard of well written show. Not every single show will be like that for somebody. Not every single movie will be like that for somebody. Not every book will be like that for somebody. That's just fact. But the issue is that Blackarooni, because he hasn't established a metric, he's kind of just there saying that it is, but then we don't have a comparison. You could argue that he believes a well-written show or a movie is like The Incredible Hulk 2008, but we both know, me and the viewer, that you're only there to see the Hulk CGI scenes. It's universally agreed upon that the Hulk 2008 was kind of just a failed product, and they moved it along. You can say you can like it. I don't care if you like it or not, and I don't care if you think it's quote unquote objectively good. But you just need to understand that The Incredible Hulk 2008 is probably not something you want to base your metrics on for well-written things, right? So there are certain things that I believe that you shouldn't base your metrics on, because this is my personal viewpoint. But Blackarooni doesn't see this way. But you get the point, right? He hasn't done anything like that. So we're just kind of sitting there and we're waiting for at least him to do a comparison of something that's well written, or a well written scene that's like that. Instead, he just calls it a badly written show. So with that said, we're moving on.
So, in conclusion, Cate Randa is a terrible character and an even worse person. The show tries and validates her by having things go the way she wants. She wants May around? Boom, she's got May. And she'll ignore the dubious things she's done and never address them, because that would lead to real conflict as opposed to the artificial, fabricated conflict. And yes, sabotaging an entire corporation's operations instead of calling the police's fabricated conflict, because this stupid decision enables her character arc. Kate's sins are never brought up and addressed because there's nobody alive to hold her accountable for it, and doesn't bring it up to anybody, not even Kentaro, someone who would absolutely benefit his character growth and the mending of their relationship with May from knowing this. How beautiful would it have been to have Kentaro's broken relationship be fixed using the pieces of Kate's life. They're both broken, but with mutual help they can fix each other. Cate would learn to forgive herself in that regard. Kentaro is not only given more agency, but his relationship with Cate is strengthened, and he and May can rekindle their love once again. As for the dead kid, I have no idea how you'd fix that, unless they pull a Shikishima like in -1. -1 was a masterpiece, by the way. Consistently missing opportunities to have her character grow, missing opportunities to show the audience that she's a morally upstanding person, and over time she does and says less and less morally dubious things, as if that's a substitute for character development, when in actuality, the best way to have her character actually develop—
No, these monsters have taken everything from me. No more. This curse is broken.
This is not criticism. This is basically just wish fulfillment on what he wishes the show would have done. Also, this still isn't character analysis. This is just him complaining about Cate Randa being a bad character in his eyes.
Only do they not explore in depth how people were affected, akin to how you'd see it in movies like Avengers Age of Ultron.
So at this point, if you haven't noticed, because of all these Marvel things, I have been implying for a majority amount of time that Blackarooni really wants the Monsterverse to be more like Marvel. Mostly, a lot of generic complaints have come around that people want more backstory to fictional characters nowadays. When, in order to do this, they need to emulate Marvel, produce solo films, and make things feel more interconnected. We need things to be more, quote unquote, consistent. The point here is that Blackarooni is upset at all these retcons, all these characters being slightly malicious or negative, and needs them to be more Marvelized. Hence why most of his footage so far has been Marvel. While yes, he does go on to other scenes like Dune for some reason, and Batman versus Superman also as an example of his argument where he's going, oh well, we need more things to follow the ramifications of stuff. He actually really just wants the Monsterverse to follow Marvel style ramifications or sequels that have ramifications in the style of a movie he likes known as Civil War. He doesn't actually want any broad sweeping changes to how the Monsterverse handles this stuff. He just wants it to be closest as possible to Marvel, something that he likes and something that he cares about. The problem is that, well, these examples here, specifically of the Marvel variety, which he uses heavily with weird Dune scenes interspersed, is that, well, Marvel movies are not very good. So I recommend using better examples, but we both know, me and the viewer, we both know that Blackarooni won't do that. Blackarooni is very insistent that things be very close or very good to Marvel. Hence why the 10-minute opener is just him
So even a
worshiping
scumbag as
Marvel
vile and wicked as
properties,
Fisk cannot be
worshiping
killed by Matt.
specific
So
solo
what does he do?
films.
He lets out a primal scream, as that is the most satisfying release of his pent-up vitriol for this man, less than a man, this monster. Doing something like that requires a level of self-control, something most people don't have. Self-control, something the Bible urges people to have, a commandment that Matt decides to uphold at the very edge, the border between salus and damnatio aeterna, salvation and eternal damnation.
See, I don't know what the term border between salvation and eternal damnation means because absolutely there's no like real context you can give these words in this scene at all. What this scene is describing as has nothing to do with salvation or eternal damnation or any straddling between the lines of that. So whatever he's saying here is insane, but it works, right? They're very catchy words, very epic sounding words. The point here is that Blackarooni is functioning as a brand in this moment. He is advertising Daredevil in the Incredible Hulk 2008. Essentially, he's being an agent for Marvel and he may not even know it. But what else is interesting is that he is still functioning as a mini Cinema Sins when he recites plots positively. The same thing goes on with the whole Legacy of Monsters, where negatively he does the same thing, but it doesn't matter because he's doing the exact same thing on both sides. So, regardless of which one he goes through, he can interchange. Blackarooni does have Cinema Sin style videos. This is more akin to the No, We Can't Have Both, where he goes on a whole long winded rant about this stuff. It is hyper edited, and you could just simply like walk away from this, and Blackarooni will simply eventually tell you that you don't need to take this as seriously as his critique videos. The whole message is there for you. That this whole thing is just a broad statement. If he actually wanted to one day, he could go in depth. This is why his longer videos are his more serious videos, like this video. The only problem with this is that this is the same tactic that Cinema Sins and Mauler does. Mauler, who is a Cinema Sins light, does the exact same thing, where he goes, oh, well, B, the Unbridled Rages videos, they're not actually anything serious. You don't need to care about these. This is the same as the No We Cannot Have Both video. But, Mahler will say, a more accurate representation that's not for entertainment and more of actual critique is my Star Wars The Last Jedi review videos. The reality is that all these videos are the exact same. Cinema Sins videos are the exact same. But what Cinema Sins does is literally the same exact thing as Mahler does because they invented this strategy, specifically with these film criticism strategies, where they're like, oh, well, you don't actually have to take these seriously because we're satire. But you want to know what is not satirical? You want to know what isn't funny? The brand. Cinema Sins as a brand is gargantuan. They have made a gazillion dollars off of basically freeing you from actual experience. You don't have to actually watch this movie anymore. You just get to hear the slightly quiet voice that's telling you it's time for nappy time while this video plays, and the sin counter goes up at ding, 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 ding. Right? That's the point. And because Cinema Sins does this, they don't really need to, be honest here. They can just straight up lie. We know Cinema Sins is lying about this whole satire thing because we know that Cinema Sins is being genuinely honest. But in this context, we can understand that Cinema Sins, because they're saying that satire, means that we can't take any of their videos seriously. But Cinema Sins, this whole brand, is taken seriously. The same goes for Mahler. Mahler will desperately try to tell you that his criticisms in Unbridled Rages are two separate ideas and two separate things. One's for entertainment and one's the actual meat and potatoes. The reality is that they're literally both the same stuff, but Mahler and one of them swears even harder than the other. They're both practically the same exact works, the same exact analysis, and even his fans know it to the point where they genuinely take it all at face value because his fans especially know that these criticisms from both sides are the exact same, both are equally valid, and Mahler is a good critic. That's basically what they're saying. And that's what Mahler is implicitly trying to avoid too. He's trying to get away from the fact that, oh yeah, well, my fan base all takes at face value. But the reality is that his fan base is correct at taking at face value. So what does this have to do with Blackarooni in specifics? Because we have been talking about Cinema Sins and Mahler for a very long time. The thing, though, is with all this stuff that Blackarooni emulates and so on and so forth, is that these many Mahler clones that have popped up function the exact same way. And they don't have to function like it all the way, but they take bits and pieces and create their own things. They create their own brand unseriousness for moments, and then they take it seriously for some parts. This extends to jokes. This extends to lines. This extends to plot details. This extends to the things that they review. And especially, this extends to this video. In this moment, Blackarooni has been essentially telling you that the Incredible Hulk and Daredevil are things that you should care about, things that you are worth your time. But Legacy of Monsters is not, because he is booing at the screen. He goes, boo, why doesn't Kentaro get back with May? And then meanwhile, in Daredevil, he is going, this is just like the Bible, kids. And yeah, sure, Daredevil does have biblical stuff in it, but he's saying this with so much gravitas, so much power behind it, so much love, and you could tell. So, with all this in mind, Blackarooni genuinely, 100%, freely gets to go on with his day with this video having made, and he knows that if you watch this video, you will know that Legacy of Monsters will never be worth your time. But what is worth your time is his videos, which are, well, quote unquote, critiques, and Daredevil and an Incredible Hulk 2008.
Don't see how the world is affected, how governments respond, how this affects the economy, commerce, distribution of resources, etc. For contrast, in the first Gamera movie of the Heisei trilogy, we see the price of food change due to the presence of Gamera and the Gaios. In Godzilla -1, we see the aftermath of the Ginza attack, how the thousands dead affect the people, the government response, and most importantly, the mental state of Shikishima. In Shin Godzilla, we see the effects of Godzilla's first form, the aftermath, and Yaguchi's reaction to this government's lack of action. And in the aftermath of of the atomic breath scene, we get a subtle glimpse at Yaguchi's mental state in multiple instances, as well as his response. We're also shown and told by the movie what the effects of the atomic breath are, and what the government is to do about it. These movies take these elements into account, and it makes sure you remember them so the stakes are always burning in the back of your mind, and it's effective when grounding the story. In Monarch, we get 2 scenes and a throwaway line, which, given the premise of the show, that's pretty pathetic. We get that part with the plane at the beginning, and that scene where the crew goes to Cate's mom's house, and the previously mentioned scene in the bunker, but that's the most amount of addressing we ever get. We get Easter eggs too in the background, but not actual addressing. Nobody talks about the aftermath in detail. We don't get any support group scene like what we see in Avengers Endgame at the very beginning of the movie, which is arguably one of the best scenes in the MCU. Nobody talks about their trauma in detail, and nobody talks about the loss. What are people's views on Godzilla? What are people's views on the government response? How does knowing monsters exist affect people's lives? How do they cope with it? How about the suicides? Do people commit suicide because of Godzilla's existence? Are they so overwhelmed by his existence that they decide the world isn't big enough for the both of them? How long will rebuilding take? How are governors handling the situation? Can people afford to buy food? What is the international response like? How does this affect the relationships between nations of the world? How does this affect political tensions and international conflict? How many people died? How are they dealing with the corpse disposal? Is martial law in place? Do cities have curfews? If so, how does this affect people's lives? Even the religious aspect of it. How do people respond to Godzilla if Godzilla does not appear in their sacred texts, in their Bibles, in their dogmas? How do they respond to so much destruction? Things that their sacred texts do not tell them to account for because, well, they couldn't possibly have anticipated something like this from happening. All of these questions we could have answered via Cate, or literally anybody else. In fact,
Blackarooni here is so obsessed with understanding every little detail in the show, you think that he might be desperately looking for all of the knowledge of the show. I mean, that's technically what he's doing because he genuinely believes that when you watch the media, you are getting immersed, and thus you must know all the answers to everything. You must understand all the details and every single bit and piece of the world. The thing is that Blackarooni genuinely thinks that in order for something to be good, or specifically Legacy Monarch of Monsters to be good, they explore every detail and they explain the economy. They tell you about the religious sects and all that stuff created from Godzilla appearing, etc., etc. The truth is that you don't need to know. You don't really have to know any of these because the story isn't about any of that. The story is about Cate Randa trying to find her dad and then getting disinterested to go fight Kurt Russell or whatever his name is. So, have you ever seen Gravity Falls? If you haven't, spoilers now, go watch it. But there's an episode called Sock Opera, Season 2, Episode 4. Dipper is this little dweeb who is super smart, and he's trying to find out all these mysteries if he opens up this laptop. There is obviously a password that he has to do, and he keeps doing it, and he keeps failing. He's trying to get to infinite knowledge, basically, or more aptly, absolute knowledge. He wants to know everything. Bill Cipher sits at this gate between, the human world and the absolute knowledge world. Basically, what I'm saying is that Bill Cipher is the monster who guards this gate. Bill Cipher knows that Dipper is a stupid moron who will do anything to get absolute knowledge. So Bill Cipher tricks him and takes his body. He uses very clever wording. The point that I'm making, though, is that Blackarooni here genuinely wants into this fictional world, right? He wants to know absolute knowledge of Monarch, Legacy, and Monsters. He wants to know every detail. He wants to be inside it. He wants to be immersed. It's to the point where it's a little uncomfortable where you hear him asking all these questions, demanding that the show him every bit and piece of this world, every moment. And several moments, flashbacks, background scenes, mentions aren't even enough. Blackarooni specifically cites several movies that are explicitly focusing on these aspects of tragedy as their inner workings, but he wants Legacy of Monsters to halt every momentum, everything that it's doing right now, and explicitly scream it in your face about every little bit in detail about human life, even though the story's not about it. So Blackarooni here is desperately punching the gate towards infinite knowledge, or absolute knowledge, my bad. Absolute knowledge over and over and over again. But he's not getting there. Of course, he's never getting there. It is impossible to know every little bit in detail, but you can infer from the show and in other MonsterVerse properties that exist with it.
Two pieces of media I delved deep into display the characterization of men who, due to unfortunate circumstances outside of their control, were forced to not only deal with the consequences of their actions, but through purifying fire were transformed into better human beings over time. Cate was thrust into an event outside her control as well, and yet she regresses as a human being, while people around her, except May, grow. And yet the show treats this as growth. Whether it's intentional or not is up for debate, but it's clear that the show wants us to root for her.
Blackarooni haphazardly finally brings back his main point full circle to absolutely nothing. He says that purifying fire, which is coded as the gauntlet, will basically make you a better person. These two people had specific examples that made them better, so why can't Cate Randa be better? The truth is that Hulk in Avengers 2012 literally ran off to India because Bruce Banner stated that he felt more useful there. So, The Incredible Hulk 2008 is obviously maligned and ignored, and for obvious real reasons, real world issues, and obviously that it doesn't matter. So moving now along, I haven't seen Daredevil, so that doesn't matter, I guess. I haven't seen it, so who knows. But the point here that I'm making is that this gauntlet stuff is not going to make somebody better. Cate Randa was already messed up before the monster attacks. Her generational trauma of her family members being squashed by monsters, of course, will have an impact on you. And having it happen to you is going to have an impact on you. Cate Randa has been messed up. Obviously, Cate Randa will do stuff that is morally incorrect or morally wrong, I should say. Cate Randa does bad things. Does that make Cate Randa a bad character? No, definitely not. Blackarooni is just very convinced that morally bad characters, as we've gone through before, equal bad characters in storytelling.
Stuck with that as opposed to uncovering the secrets of the Hollow Earth and such. It's expansion and no detail. Have the first half of the show focus on the aftermath and the second half focus on consistent world building, perfecting rather than adding. I'm 100% certain people would love this show, be it because they appreciate the story or out of the consumer's desire for Godzilla content. But whatever the case may be, if it's well written, people are going to love the show.
It is entirely possible to love a show even if it's not well written in somebody else's eyes. It is entirely possible to do so. Blackarooni here is trying to create this false dichotomy where there are the tolerable human people and the intolerable, the toxic subjects, these consumer people who are equated towards as zombies from World War Z. The problem with this whole dichotomy thing that he's creating is that this consumer audience is, in his eyes, vaguely subhuman of some sorts. So why would these quote unquote consumers, these subhuman people who only devour things in the name of their brand, love uh, well written things? So this false dichotomy here comes off as insanely reactionary.
However, they've made it impossible. This show is an absolute waste, and you'll see people praise the ever-loving hell out of this show because, let's be honest, there are things to love about the show like the performances, the soundtrack, the visuals, well, some of them. But by having good actors give good performances to bad script, the show fools you into thinking it's good when it isn't. Trust me, it's more common than you think. The same thing happened with the Amazing Spider-Man movies and the same thing happened with The Flash, well, mostly. And it's not just the performances. Many people went into the show expecting Godzilla, and Godzilla did show up several times, but the marketing made it clear that Godzilla was just the bait. The hook was the premise itself, and the premise was everything orbiting Godzilla rather than Godzilla himself. And still, some people judged it by how much Godzilla was on screen, which, dear God, it's impossible to reason with these people. So let's advocate for higher standards, shall we?
Blackarooni's conclusion here doesn't really feel like a conclusion. Instead, it feels more closer to a unfinished thought that he ends on. And, that's it of the video. Normally, it ends here. And so we move on with things. And, we're done with whatever this is and we go on to the next one. The thing, though, is that this video is interesting for different reasons. We're going to go back a little to parts of the conclusion that I deliberately cut out so I could talk about this.
Oh, and don't think Keiko is safe either. She is an advocate for the preservation of Titans, and anybody who does that is an enemy of humanity. Coexistence is a myth. It's conquered or be conquered. Good lord, does Pacific Rim not teach us anything? Cloverfield? The original King Kong? Long Kong? Anyone? So
have you ever heard of the indomitable human spirit? If you haven't, the indomitable human spirit is basically an internet meme where humans are inevitably cornered by something that is not human. In this context, the indomitable human spirit means in this moment, the human rises up against all odds to save the day, or something along those lines. However, the indomitable human spirit has literally transformed itself from this optimistic meme against the quote unquote cold indifference of the universe into humans versus aliens. So the safe jingoism that goes on with these are basically these foreigners come down from who knows where to destroy humanity. And the humans basically are cornered. And in this crucial moment, the humans, with their indomitable human spirit powers, fight back. Basically, what I'm saying is that the indomitable human spirit no longer means what it used to mean as an optimistic thing. It has basically transformed itself into a very reactionary sentiment that people can use to secretly mask or, well, unintentionally mask their hatred for foreigners or other outsiders. In this literal case, Blackarooni is doing the exact same thing with Godzilla media. Here, he is literally acting like that one dude from Getter Robo, the main protagonist, going that there's only one way that we can live, and that is if we kill the enemy first. Unfortunately, Getter Robo literally criticizes this, and Getter Robo literally has, at the finale, the Getter Robo become the Getter Emperor, who will fight until all their enemies are destroyed and they win, no matter the cost. This is the safe jingoism. This is the indomitable human spirit. Victory without end. So, Blackarooni doing this is literally going, yes, it's good that we kill the monsters. It's good that we destroy every living animal on the planet, specifically of the kaiju variety. And so, Blackarooni ignores the original 1933 King Kong's message, which is a message about colonialism and other very hard-hitting topics, and also 2005 Kong, which operates on the same thing. Kong does not teach us to go and murder the monster and disembowel its organs at all. None of the kaiju movies depicted in any of this besides Pacific Rim, which 100% advocates for it, which is why Blackarooni likes it so much, to kill monsters. They don't do that. None of them do, except for Pacific Rim, as I said a moment earlier. So, with this in mind, Blackarooni is literally advocating for reactionary politics through the lenses of monsters. As anybody normal says, which nobody says this, the personal is the political.
Yeah, it generally, it's sort of like we should return the monkey, but then ignores the fact that if we're returning to monkey, a lot of bad things happen when we return to monkey.
Yeah, there, even without the giant monsters, there is so much about nature that is terrifying, and there is so many things in nature that can kill you very easily and very painfully.
Yeah, and it's not even like they are trying to kill you because they hate you. It's just it's literally just nature.
Yeah, it's who they are. It's what they are. We are incompatible, let's say. So the only reason we don't really coexist with nature. We dominate nature.
I mean, that sounds harsh, of course, but it's true.
It's harsh, but it's necessary. It's it's what you would call a necessary evil. Me personally, I don't see it as an evil at all. I think dominating nature really keeps it in check because it's either them or us, right? We kind of need nature but nature doesn't need us.
What does domination mean?
Domination? Oh, it just means that we control that. Well, not control, because there are things about nature that we cannot control, but we are at the top of the food chain. Basically, if there is an animal that is going to attack us, we have guns, we have
the artillery. We severely outnumber and overpower a lot of animal species. We have driven several species into extinction. Like, a lot of species are extinct because of humanity, because over time we have become really, really good at killing things. And because of this ability, nature doesn't really stand much of a chance against humanity. Let's be real here.
This bizarre safe jingoism that I mentioned burns its way into this moment here in Godzilla, the Myth of Coexistence or whatever, which is a kind of just insane title, where basically Blackarooni advocates for industrial expansion, even more of it, and also advocates for, killing nature because nature's inhuman. It's not us, and nature will do anything in its power to get to us, and we have to fight back. And weird things about trophic levels being irrelevant and more being about how apex predators are violence incarnate or something. One, apex predators, or top of the food chain, as he states, is not about violence, it's about trophic levels. So that's insane. And the other thing is that industrial expansion is bad. Us versus them mentality is bad. But these guys just uncritically agree with this. They nod their heads along, or they don't even respond to this. There is no real pushback in this conversation. This is just straightforward, uncritical agreement that nature is, pure evil or whatever. It's us versus them. But we can also make a thorough line from this whole nature standpoint to Godzilla, where Blackarooni is genuinely convinced that Godzilla is nothing more than just an animal that can be also slaughtered. The reality is that because Blackarooni doesn't really understand Godzilla works, we could talk about how Godzilla is much closer to person, which no doesn't mean human, person to, you know, animals and stuff like that. So basically, Godzilla's a person. Let's just get that away. He's an all too human figure, Nietzsche stuff that you probably won't care about because a lot of people in my viewers probably don't want to see or anything about that. It's Nietzsche stuff. And basically, he's like, the excess jouissance, or whatever that word is, of Sarazawa, where Sarazawa basically suffers, suffers, and suffers, and this monster emerges from him and lays waste to Tokyo. Godzilla is a part of all of us. That is like one of the major themes in a lot of Godzilla works, especially Godzilla 2000 that just straight up spells it out, where it's like, oh yeah, Godzilla will forever be, at odds against humanity, but you'll also be at odds against other things. We are always at a war with ourselves forever and ever. That's basically the message that usually one of the many messages that Godzilla pumps out. Blackarooni, however, is very convinced that there are no dividing lines in the human body between human and animal. Blackarooni is very convinced that nature exists as an external evil force that must be slain by our beautiful weapons, by industrial expansion, or has to be kept in check through rampant destruction of everything in its path, or whatever. The point, though, is that Blackarooni is literally doing safe jingoism on a stream, and nobody's telling him that he sounds like a maniac. And that's like the biggest problem. So I did all this safe jingoism stuff to point out the obvious xenophobia narratives that seem to be going on with Blackarooni. So with that being said, we're gonna move on to better things, like the Cate Randa video, which is like only a sliver being better. This Blackarooni whole critique part was interesting to do for the last several months because Blackarooni himself just genuinely didn't have anything to show. Blackarooni has never been a good critic whatsoever, and so if anyone thinks so, you're probably deluding yourselves into believing that this guy who just recites the plots of shows and movies to you and then proceeds to complain that things are not going his way is a good critic, then you might need to get like your ears checked or something. Honestly, I am very sorry if any of one of you got suckered into believing this nonsense. But I personally don't blame some people. Some people just don't like a show and really want a long analysis, like breaking down other stuff. But it's not a long analysis. It's not breaking down anything. It's really just laugh tracks and stuff like that. You don't need to experience the show or watch anything yourself. You don't need to come to your own conclusion. This guy will do it for you. And I'm not saying my video is the end all be all of anything. I would never say that. My videos are not designed to be the end all be alls, and they just come from my personal standpoint. I will defend my personal standpoint at any time. I will do so. These are my personal thoughts. I do not want every single person on the planet to just agree with me, and I don't think everyone should agree with me. But usually, my detractors, like the Council of Candor, have said very asinine and wrong things. A really good example would be this.
A fucking dumb point. I want to smack you, sir. Just because they're on
Yeah, I
boat, they
think
wouldn't use nautical miles.
This is
nautical miles would be speed, right? Not distance.
So, nautical miles is a universal measurement for length out at sea. It's designed to be for everybody in the ocean. They wouldn't use kilometers. So, the Council of Candor, being very American centric, of course, doesn't notice, and they, lie about other cultures, like the whole God made Japan nonsense type stuff that deliberately ignores real world religion instead of, you get the point. But on to more pressing matters. What happens after? Blackarooni is not a good critic. Blackarooni is gone from his YouTube channel for a while, and it'll be a long time before he comes back. So, what do I have to say to most of the rest of his reviews that I won't cover? His reviews are terrible. They're uninteresting, they're boring, and they're kind of just hit pieces without real thought put into them. They're mostly just broad sweeping statements, but they're not interesting broad sweeping statements or one that you can agree with. They're just bad sweeping statements. And so Blackarooni as a critic is essentially just emulating Mahler's style. He's not finding his own style. He's not doing anything on his own. He's literally just copying Mahler. That's it. I'm not kidding. And is Mahler a good critic? No, definitely not. He's a very mediocre critic to probably bad critic. But Blackarooni is especially worse because he is deliberately trying to be Mahler. And that's the thing. He's not actually trying to be himself. Blackarooni, as an example, is literally reciting the entire plots of movies like, Mahler does, and he genuinely thinks that's substantiative. That's embarrassing. That's genuinely embarrassing. If you ever did that, like in front of my face when you're trying to talk about a movie, I would literally walk away. Like, you sound dumb. You are just reciting a movie. You're going, this movie's genius because, and you recite the entire plot and then not actually say anything about why it's genius. That's literally what has been going on. And that's how the inverse goes. So Blackarooni as a critic hasn't offered anything to the Godzilla medium as a whole. Mostly just people have been making fun of him. So what else are we going to do? Well, there are a lot of other bad critics out there. If we could go about it, if you underfold their Godzilla points, you could probably understand their points with other movies. And that's a key thing, right? If you like a franchise that much and you see a video that is a very, negative video, watch it and then you can debunk it yourself. You will find out that a lot of movie takes from their perspective are awful movie takes that way. That's how I found out. It's not that hard to do so. And I mean, I technically got lucky because Blackarooni is just a bad critic in general, which is easy to spot, and he's also a Godzilla fan, which not really. He's more obsessed with the -1 of Godzilla and stuff like that. But this is more just addendums. Me talking on and talking on. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I personally don't have anything else to say besides the fact that Blackarooni as a critic is really bad. His Godzilla videos are awful, and this is the last video I'll do of Blackarooni. I did say I was going to talk about him until the end of days, or I get tired of him, and it just so happens that I got tired of doing it. This is basically like designed to be not a hit piece, but a large criticism video that genuinely uses actual psychodynamics and stuff, which I've been using this entire time. Psychodynamics for most of this. So even if you didn't notice, you're probably wondering why I was a little more thorough with this stuff this time. But this is the case. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I just think that if you're actually going to criticize me, please don't say nautical miles isn't used out at sea. That is embarrassing. Anyways, we're done here. Thank you for watching. For anyone who still stuck around to the end, this is the longest video I will make, and hopefully I won't have to make anything longer than this. I really don't want to, and I'm probably never going to do that. So again, thank you for watching, and have a good day or good night wherever you are.